Thank you so much, Andrew. And hi, you guys. I wish I could see you, but I'll just talk to myself, I guess. So my name is Silja Litvin. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm half American, half German, but I'm actually speaking to you from London right now. So it's 9 p.m. And I have to warn you, I've been alone with twins all day. So if I'm a bit slow or tired, I just doze off halfway, just to like knock or tell Andrew to wake me up. So when you study psychology, you learn all about symptoms, diagnostics, and treatments, but you don't learn about the healthcare system, right? So when I started working in the NHS, which is the National Health Trust here in the UK, I was really shocked to meet people who had been on a waiting list for half a year or longer to get their 7 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy, and then who had shared that they had their first symptoms like 4 years before that. It really blew my mind. And when I started looking into health care, I realized that it wasn't accessible for everyone. Not everybody could afford it. Not everybody was covered. Not everybody wanted to get health care even though they needed it. And that there would have to be a better way to make mental health care scalable. So even if I continued working and the NHS is free for the people who, are past threshold and they actually get to see someone. So, but even if I worked myself to the bone, I could barely scratch the surface of the people who needed our help and our care. So I started to think about, okay, what can I do to deliver a tool that is actually scalable, but is evidence-based, so it actually does what it's supposed to do. And this was in 2016-17. There was a lot of emerging research that web-based intervention and desktop-based interventions were as good as face-to-face therapy or pharmaceutical for a certain population. So I could see the trend of people, privately leaving the desktop to go to apps and smartphones for certain services. So I thought, okay, I'm going to make a mental health app. And this is when you Googled or you put into the App Store search, you put depression, you got 50 apps and not 5,000 apps, right? So developed an application. My dad is a developer, by the way, so poor guy said he never wanted to work for Apple, and then he did our first application on iOS. He still loves me, thankfully. We did a clinical trial and could prove that using that application for 4 weeks significantly lowered depression and anxiety levels up to the level of a beta blocker, but with no side effects. And I thought, I'm going to save the world from depression and anxiety for like $9.99, which means it's accessible for everyone. Launched the application, got a little bit of funding, and crickets. So we got a lot of downloads, and then at day 1, day 2, we could pretty much last our population. And so the problem with digital, and even with face-to-face therapy, but much less so, but with digital intervention, is that people don't stick to therapy long enough to actually have an impact. The American Psychology Association says on average people spend 2 minutes on a mental health app and then they delete it. And of course 2 minutes not long enough to have any kind of impact. And the problem is that a lot of people that experience a bad or a not good match mental health app is that they say, okay, digital mental health is not for me, and they don't try the second and the third and the fourth application. So it's really important to build a product that people want to use. So I was looking at the target population that I'm interested in, which is young adults, let's say anywhere from 16 to 35 years old, and saying, how do I get them to stick to what's good for them? You have to meet them where they are. And out of this population, 70% are casual gamers. And if you look at the gaming industry, they are 20 years ahead of therapy in behavioral psychology because they want people to stick to the game, they want people to have fun, they want them to be immersed, and they want them to spend money, right? So I thought to myself, why don't we use the know-how of the gaming industry in a safe and ethical way as the vehicle for therapy? Because the brain is made for narration and play. And if there's anything that you have to do, an exercise or, you have to learn something, if it's done through storytelling or through play, people are much more likely to stick to it and to remember it when they need it. And so I put my company together. We developed eQuoo, which is an evidence-based game for mental health, specifically depression and anxiety. And I am going to do a mini walkthrough of kind of like what our product is, just so that you understand how you can merge mental health and prevention, early intervention with gaming as a product, and then go a little bit further about, as a developer, you have a very specific set of challenges that can be detrimental to your mental health, and then how to recognize certain symptoms, what that could be, and then what you could do to kind of make sure that if you are already experiencing symptoms, or if you might down the road, that you don't go down the rabbit hole, but you catch it beforehand. So that's me. I am a clinical psychologist and PhD candidate, and if everything goes well, in next 2 or 3 months, I'll be able to do my defense and finally, after 200 years, get my PhD, so pray for me. I think one of the things that has become a little bit more apparent now since COVID, because everybody's talking about it, is how prevalent mental illness is. Before that, a lot of people were really shocked to hear that 1 in 4 struggle with mental illness, right? And the lifetime prevalence, or the probability that anyone will have a mental health issue in their lifespan, is about 46%. So it's very, very high, right? So I think while that could be considered a scary number, it also means that you are not alone if you are experiencing mental illness, or if you will or have. And that it means that there's a community of growing evidence and solutions and peers that are sticking together and helping each other. And that it is something that businesses should not ignore. And if, for example, you are employed somewhere and you're not, your own little independent game development company, that you can expect your employers to do something about it, because it has an impact not just on your well-being, but on the company as well, and your performance and everything. So it's an all-around global subject that we just can't escape. 75% of this audience says that they have left their job citing mental health reason, and that it impacts their productivity. So it's nothing we can just ignore. Like, if you want to keep good employees, make sure that they are healthy and halfway happy, because that will make sure that they can actually do what they're best at, and live up to their talent. 44% of all the doctor notes are attributed to mental health. So a lot of the things that people go to a doctor for, like headaches, lower back pain, intestinal, sleep issues, these are all connected to mental illness. So it's actually not that you get unwell mentally because you're having a headache. It is that you are unwell mentally and you don't really know how to recognize it, and you physically recognize the headache. 90% of the population take mental health days, but they don't say it's a mental health day. They say it's a sick day because of stigma, right? Then 83% have no plans to inform their employer, which is understandable, specifically depending on the culture that you're working in. So if you went and you said, okay, I'm really struggling with anxiety right now, and then you get laughed at and someone says man up or woman up or something like that, that is not helpful. So most people don't feel safe and secure in their workspace to be able to talk about that. 91% want their employers to do more, and only 75% of the people struggling with mental illness actually seek help. And 75% will never seek help. And that has a lot of reasons, many of them being that people think it's normal to feel the way they do. So they think it's normal to not be able to sleep, to be irritable, to have headaches, lower back pain, and, just be all around miserable, because that's what everybody is, right? And then, of course, there's stigma, and then there's financial, and then sometimes you just don't have the time, or, you don't believe that psychology is for you. So these are kind of like overall numbers to know that you're not alone, and it is very prevalent in society. When we built the game, we built it around 5 psychological dimensions. The first one being resilience. And why resilience? Because it is the biggest factor in not developing mental illness. I have a slide a little bit further down the line about resilience and why it's so important, but the higher your resilience is, the less likely it is that you are going to develop anxiety or depression. Why did I choose anxiety and depression? Because those are the most widespread disorders, specifically in the target population, but in general. And anxiety is the most widespread, closely followed by depression, and for a lot of lucky, or rather unlucky people, it's comorbid. So they have depression as a main disorder, and then anxiety as a second. So you're so depressed that you can't get up and take a shower, and then you get anxious about that. I mean, like, what kind of hell is that, right? And then 2 more psychological dimensions, which is personal growth, which is really important for employers, for example, to say, this is something that allows people to rise to a challenge, stick to a task, get through periods of work, like grunts that are very unpleasant and are a hazard to your mental health, but they're, they're limited. And then relationship skills, interpersonal relationship skills. So the target audience that we are looking at with the app, and which is my kind of area of expertise, are speaking about suffering from loneliness, isolation, and disconnect. And this is because they don't have the skill set to build and then maintain meaningful relationships. And if you're lonely and isolated, it is extremely detrimental for your mental health. So the better your relationship skills are, and that doesn't mean you have to be like an extrovert and have 500 friends. It just means that you have enough close connections that you don't feel isolated and alone and lonely. And these are skills that we teach in the game, and has an impact on mental well-being. For a lot of people, when they hear mental health, it equates mental illness, but that's actually not true. Mental health is the whole, the whole part of mental health. I like to kind of see it as a sliding scale. So we go from people who have high mental well-being, they are high achievers, or they're just happy individuals and that live very healthy lives and know how to deal with adverse events, all the way to people that we lose to suicide. And most of the people in the population are usually around the vulnerable area. So people who are in vulnerable situations, and right now during COVID, who isn't in a vulnerable situation, and that can easily slide to people experiencing first symptoms of depression, anxiety, and that back into a healthier state and back and forth. And then unfortunately, a few people scoot all the way to needing face-to-face therapy, pharmaceuticals, and then even fewer need to go to hospitalization, or we lose them to suicide. So it is an absolute scale. So from a very healthy perspective to a deadly perspective, mental health is the whole package. I chose I would say the 3 most prevalent mental illnesses to kind of explain the most common symptoms and how to recognize it, just because these are the things that you would be most likely to deal with. That doesn't mean that that's it, right? But it's kind of like an overview. And one of them is burnout. And the things that I learned about being a developer is that you have these moments where it's like a month or two, a game's coming out, and you really have to crunch, and you can easily burn out if it goes on for too long, because most people are quite resilient, but if it goes on too long, then you run out of resources. So one of the typical symptoms is apathy, lack of motivation and joy. So you're doing the same thing that you love doing and that you pursued all your life, but you feel empty, you can't get motivated by it anymore, you don't feel that joy. The feeling of working hard and feeling drained, but you don't feel accomplished, or sometimes you look like, what have I been doing all day, right? It doesn't feel like you're doing anything tangible. Frequent illness, so having a lot of colds, allergy outbreaks that you didn't have, breakouts like your skin is bad, sleeplessness, not being able to sleep, insomnia, like ruminations. You're sitting in bed and you're trying to sleep, and then your head just goes zzz, and you're thinking about you forgot this and you need to do this and this is things like that. And irritability with coworkers, family, and friends. And so irritability is something that is common with burnout, anxiety, and depression. And it is more common a symptom with men than it is with women. So sometimes men get depression or burnout and they're like really irritable and very aggressive, and they think you think you wouldn't come up to the idea that that could be depression or anxiety. But it is a way that like this nervous energy just comes out, and if you're on edge the whole time, little things can trigger the flight or fight response, and sometimes the fight response is there and is more prevalent, and that's when you get into someone's face. So if you, for example, you're building code, you're typing away, and then someone interrupts you, or something happens, or coffee spills, or you press the wrong button or something, you feel like you want to take your keyboard and smash it, and that's not your normal self, that could be a sign of irritability that is linked to something that is a mental health issue that needs to be looked at. Depression and the lack of vision. The lack of vision just means that you can't see yourself in 2 or 3 years. You don't hunger for something new. You're not looking for anything. You're just kind of like stuck in this nothingness of apathy and kind of feeling meh and burned out. Depression is often described to me as a psychologist not only as a feeling of deep sadness, but a feeling of emptiness and meaninglessness, which is quite chilling when you hear people describe that. So if you go through the world and you're smelling the flowers, the sun is shining, you get to eat that ice cream you always wanted, you always loved, and you can't feel anything, it feels void and meaningless, that could be a sign of depression. Fatigue, not having the energy, not being able to do the things you used to love. Insomnia. So the interesting thing about depression is that a lot of the things are quite double-sided. So we say sleep issues in general, but it could mean that you don't sleep at all or that you sleep way more than that used to sleep. So those are both symptoms of depression. Change of appetite, exactly this thing. Some people lose like 20 kilos in a couple of weeks, and other people gain 20 people because they're eating more. Trouble concentrating. So cognitive impairment is one of the big issues for depression. So for example, you don't remember things as well anymore. You can't come to conclusions. You can't make decisions. You can't read properly. You lose the thread. These are signs of cognitive impairment through depression. Loss of interest of things that brought you joy. Thoughts of self-harm that can go any way from just like kicking the wall to actually thoughts of suicide. If this is something that you experience, it is a typical symptom, but it is something you should definitely speak to your GP for, because it can escalate and it can get quite dangerous for you. So it is one of the factors that is, I guess, the most dangerous out of mental illness is the thoughts of self-harm. So watch out for that, please. And then feeling of worthlessness or guilt, like always feeling guilty, like you're too exhausted to meet up with your friends and then you get really guilty about that, or you don't want to hang out with your friends because you feel you can't really contribute to them being a friend, and then you feel guilty for that. So lots of unpleasant negative feelings around yourself. Last but not least, anxiety. Interestingly enough, almost all of the mental illness come with a lot of physical side effects, and if you speak to a psychologist, psychiatrist, or your GP, which in the UK is a general practitioner, so your family doctor, they will ask you for a bunch of things, and there's a lot of physical things in the mental health questionnaires. And muscle aches, soreness, and stiffness is a typical sign of anxiety, and you might catch yourself sitting on your computer with your shoulders all the way up to your ears, your forehead crinkled, and you're holding your breath, and that's a typical sign of anxiety. And actually, that's when I know that I am overworked and that I need to take care of myself, is when I start noticing that I'm not getting enough air and I'm feeling low of breath, and I have to stop myself and go through my breathing exercises. So for me, it's funny because as a psychologist you'd think you'd know it faster, but for me the first sign that I notice when I get anxiety is my breathing. Impaired concentration with anxiety is difficulty getting into the flow. So instead of being able to get into a project really deep and work for a while, your mind keeps on bumping around, and you check your emails a million times, and you can't create that space of deep diving into a project. Irritability, as I said before. Difficulty sleeping, usually this is being able to sleep less because of ruminations, which are thoughts and worrying that you can't stop and go round and round, and they don't lead to a solution. Sometimes worrying is good, and it's important to be able to worry, because if you can't pay your bills and you think about it, okay, how can I get a side job? Who can I ask for money? All these kind of things. That is worrying that is productive and might lead to a solution. If it's just going around in circles and you're waking up in cold sweat, and you can't find a solution for that, that's rumination, and it's not helpful. Restlessness, getting up and down, not being able to sit and relax, having your leg go bouncing up and down the whole time. Restlessness, that's a typical sign of anxiety. And then heart palpitations and breathing difficulties, and things like sweaty palms and dry mouth are typical for anxiety as well. Andrew actually asked me when we were discussing what I would talk about today, like, how do you know that you might be struggling with burnout, anxiety, or depression? And my first thought was kind of like, if you're so miserable that you're wondering if you're struggling with anxiety, depression, that is pretty much a good symptom. But there is actually a procedure to go through. And if you go to kind of like the mental health manual and you're speaking with a psychologist or a psychiatrist or your GP, it usually means out of these like 8 symptoms, you have 4 or more the last 2 weeks or longer. So if you're looking at our screen right now and you're going like, oh gosh, I've been super irritable, I haven't slept in like 4 months, my leg bounces all the time and I can't stop worrying, plus I have sweaty palms all the time and I can't get a deep breath since 2 months, that is probably a good opportunity to speak to your GP. So if anything that has been mentioned here kind of rings a bell and resonates with you and you say, oh gosh, this is me, then please speak to your general practitioner. They should be trained to be able to do these questionnaires with you and then be able to transfer you to the right professional. If that's not the case, find a therapist. They will be able to help you and know what to do. And there's a lot of mental health charities out there if you don't have the money to take care of the therapy yourself, because it is very expensive, that will allow you to have access to between 3 and 9 sessions of CBT therapy with a therapist through the charity. So it's always worth looking into. When we look at the game, and what I am very passionate about, it's mostly prevention. And here on the left hand side we have a picture that we kind of designed. Emotional or mental health is kind of like, a tightrope, and we're walking and we're balancing, and we have work and relationships and money pressures and stress and environment and microaggressions, all that kind of stuff, and we're balancing across that tightrope. And then if you fall off the tightrope and you're lucky, there's going to be a mental health resources like, a friend who can talk to you, or a group therapy, or just, information or something like that. If you fall a little bit deeper, it's an EAP, which is like an employee assistant program, things like that can catch you. But it takes a lot of time and effort to get back onto the tightrope. And what prevention does is make sure that you're not walking on a tightrope, but it becomes a bridge and eventually an 8-lane street that even if you fall over twice and you roll around, you still won't fall off. And resilience is a set of skills and resources that allows you to be able to deal with a significant adversity. So life is still gonna throw curveballs your way, but you will be able to understand where to go for help, understand how to deal with certain emotions, and understand that a lot of the pain and stressors are time sensitive. So pain usually doesn't last forever. So it will come and go, specifically grief, but most of the time it's a phase that you can go through, and then you'll come out of it again, right? So resilience and prevention programs that give you the skill set to build your resilience are important, because they keep you on the tightrope, and they make sure that the tightrope gets wider and wider the more you work on it. And so you might be looking at this and going, okay, so great, how do I make this tightrope, a bit wider? How do I take care of myself? And of course, eQuoo is made to do exactly that, but it's not for everyone. And I'm kind of like keenly aware that even though our game is built by game developers, it's not a game because we're limited by our by having to be mental health. So you might have a giggle when you look at it, but there's a lot of things that you can do outside of eQuoo, and I kind of put them into 3 pillars. And the first one is physical health. And you might be rolling your eyes right now because, oh, physical health, exercise. Have we heard that a million times? Everybody says it. But the mind and the body, they're not 2 different distinct systems. It's completely linked. And there's so much research that shows that just going out into the green, or if you can't go around the green, just going around the block for 20 minutes has a significant impact on your well-being. It really makes a difference. So taking that exercise and doing things like weight lifting in the gym instead of cardio is really, really good for your mental health. And the brain is designed to be balanced through physical activity. And then sleep hygiene. Sleep hygiene means that, like, even if you have difficulty sleeping, there are certain things that you can do to make it a little bit less difficult. So no screens an hour before you go to bed. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to read Garfield before going to bed. So it's a book. It's really not very challenging. It's very safe, and it really calms me down. Having the room cold, having the room dark, going to sleep early enough so you don't binge watch something until 2 o'clock, because that is not healthy, and then get up the next morning at 7 and be completely dead and drink a lot of coffee, things like that. And balanced eating. This doesn't mean that you can never look at McDonald's again. It just means that everything is fine if it's within balance. Like, have your chocolate, but make sure that it's not like 100% of your diet. Social health. Maintain important relationships. So people are, herd animals is the wrong word for that, but we're peer inclined. That means that we are the healthiest when we have 2 or 3 relationships that we can nurture, that we can lean on, that we can tap into when we need to. And sometimes it's one of those things that you don't speak to them for 2 weeks, and then you call them up and it's like you spoke yesterday. But it is really important to maintain those relationships so that you don't get isolated by yourself. Behavioral activation. So typical things of depression and anxiety is that you lack the motivation, the drive, and you just can't get yourself to go to those drinks, or take that walk, or go to that class or something like that. And behavioral activation is figuring out the smallest steps that you can do to get back into a social life in a way that's not so overwhelming that you don't do it at all. So that would be something like maybe texting a friend and doing FaceTime to start with, meeting for a coffee instead of going to a club, things like that. So small behavioral activation. One of my favorite exercises for resilience is resource mapping. So sometimes you think, I'm all alone in the world, but if you actually sit down and you do resource mapping and you say, okay, who is in my life, who is there, who can I rely on, who helped me in certain situations, and you write that down, you actually find yourself surrounded by people that are accessible, or even better, that deeply love you and are there for you, even though you might not be their best friend, like your grandmother or your neighbor, or sometimes it could be a pet or something like that. Just understand your resources, see that you're not alone, and kind of have a plan that if you do hit rock bottom, that you can activate one of those resources to kind of get you into behavioral activation, or help you find a therapist, for example. And finding your tribe. And I think this is one of the beautiful things about the internet, is that we all find our tribe. So if you go on Reddit, I have 18-month-old twins. I have a twin subreddit. It saved my life the first 4 months, because I realized the way I was feeling, what I was experiencing, I wasn't alone. That was kind of like my tribe, as the overtired, completely frustrated, and over anxious mom was my tribe. But it really, really helped me. So look for your tribe, and then try to find connections within that tribe. And last but not least, psychological health, psychoeducation. A course like this is a great step, because you learn about anxiety, depression, if you haven't heard about that before. Read up on blogs or podcasts about these things, because if you understand, for example, that irritability is typical for anxiety, depression, and burnout, you might be a lot more aware and be able to catch it before it becomes a proper problem. And then it just allows you to become more of an actor and less of a reactor. Therapy. So I wish everybody could afford to go to therapy, whether they need it or not. It is, I had to do 30 hours of self-experience as a psychologist. And I remember coming there all cocky and like, I'm a psychology student, like I don't need therapy, and like 2 sessions and I'm covered in tears, and I'm like, wow, this is groundbreaking. Therapy is the best thing that happened to me, and I wish everybody could have that experience. But it's not for everybody, or not for everybody right now, but this is something worth considering. And then meditation and breath work, being able to find that thing that allows you to calm down, ground yourself, and just be able to regulate yourself. And work-life boundaries. If you're going from crunch to crunch to crunch, and you're literally killing yourself that way, maybe it's important to find a different work in a, maybe a different country that has different laws. Like you could work from home for a Finnish game development company that stops working at 7 p.m., for example. boundaries, understanding that while it is important to have a job, make money and everything, that there are certain things that are more important, because if you get really ill, you won't be able to continue your job. So these are a couple of the things that to look out for, that you can do by yourself. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many resources out there, and actively looking for that thing that resonates with you. And I'll stop now, because I feel like I've been a lot longer than I'm supposed to be. Andrew, are you stopping me now?
This has been great. I do have some questions for you, but keep going.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that if everything that you heard today didn't resonate with you, or you maybe didn't connect with me or something, that doesn't mean that psychology is not for you. It just means that there is something else out there for you, and if you go looking for it, you will find it.
All right. Lots of great information for your own prevention, self-identification, and so on. Did get a few questions. I think the one that was most pressing is, how do you approach someone else? And I loved how this was very direct at the audience, how they can self-identify, but certainly being on game design teams, I know where folks are coming from when they ask this question. When you see someone struggling badly, what do you do?
Well, I think the best way is vulnerability. So disclose your own struggles first and say, the last couple of weeks, I've really been struggling with this and this and that. And then when you start communicating and connecting, that's the point where you can say, hey, listen, I don't want to overstep my boundaries, but I feel like you not having the energy that you've had last, or I saw you, crying in the bathroom or whatever it is. And, I just like to be there for you. Right? And just know, sometimes there's nothing you can do, but just knowing that there's someone there who's caring, who saw it and will help you find help is a world of difference.
And of course, you can always go on the App Store and download eQuoo for them. So we always recommend giving people games, no matter what their reason. So a question for me, we often see people in the creative industries and artists talking about using creativity to deal exactly with these issues, use the process of creation, be it music, art, a game, writing, etc. What is your feeling about that?
Oh, I love that. I think anything that connects with your creative core and allows you to access flow, be it music, coding, reading, drawing, dancing, is one of the healthiest things you can do. And there's even a lot of different art forms. There's music therapy, art therapy, dance therapy. So it's well known that is deeply beneficial for your mental well-being and mental health, and I love it if we'd all do that.
Artisan JPEG, let me get you to clarify your question. When you say, are these preventions the same for burnout, are you talking about the what you can do slide that's currently up on the screen, or do you mean something else? And while I get him to clarify, Silja, if you talk about, are these something you'd suggest for any of the issues you brought up, burnout, anxiety, and depression?
Well, if you kind of go back to the slides and you look at the symptoms, a lot of them are very similar. So the irritability is in all three of them. The sleeplessness is in all three of them. I think the feeling of the lack of vision or emptiness or apathy is in all of them. So they are very closely related in the mental health space. So all of the things in here will help with all three of them.
Okay, that looked like it answered Artisan JPEG's questions. Your last chance in chat. If you do have questions, go ahead and send them in. I've shared the link for Plutonic, which is who we're going to be working with to get you access to this. On the game dev side of things, you knew these questions had to be coming too. Have you live streamed eQuoo yet? It's always tough for live streaming.
No, I'm really embarrassed, but this is actually the first time I've used Discord. So it's a bit unfortunate that I am a clinical psychologist and I'm a bit product owner, but at the end of the day, I'm not a developer, and there's so many things we could be doing. And I'm lucky to have access to quite creative people that we can tap into as much as we can, depending on the limited resources as a startup. But I've never live streamed it, no.
All right. Well, yeah, I think that'd be a lot of fun to see people actually seeing the game in use. It's a great way. Yeah. Well, you got 500,000 downloads already, so I'm not going to be criticizing what you've done so far. It's obviously working.
You can always do better, huh? There's a couple more million people in the world that would benefit from just knowing a couple of these skills. And it's really beautiful in the focus groups when they learn one of the skills and they go, oh my God, so that's why my mother always does this, or so that's what my boss, or oh, I do this all the time. I didn't know it was unhealthy. So it's really wonderful seeing how instantly implemented and has an impact and is a tool or a weapon, a sword that they can use straight away.
Yeah, that is excellent. Certainly the live streaming, I think, breaks down the barriers of people playing a game. There are a lot of folks who will want to watch it stream before they'll play anything, certainly if they're going to pay money for it.
Well, if anybody wants to invite me to be a guest and live stream with them, I'd be happy to come on.
Yeah, I'll have to get one of our iOS streamers to jump on that, get a code for them. And I love that this is a topic still critically important to game devs and to gamers as well. Jane McGonigal is a great game dev.
Yes.
Who introduced Super Better a number of years ago. Wonderful lady. Yeah. And Super Better is still an invaluable tool for web-based version. Jane is a talented game designer. She'll be the first one to say she doesn't consider it that great a game. She is the first one. She's said that in public, but it is a very valuable tool. Yeah. So I look forward to seeing eQuoo in use as well. All right.
Yeah.
Not seeing any more questions in chat. Thank you very much for a great presentation. I'll get you to hang out for a bit and we'll move you into the general Discord chat.